Hi, geography students. We're going to continue on with the geography in Southwest Asia. And we would have talked about this, especially when you'd done that reading on Jerusalem as a holy city, how it's a holy city to the three major monotheistic religions. And the one thing I want you to really think about and consider is that um, like when we're talking about Jerusalem here and really all of Southwest Asia, it's important to understand the geography of Southwest Asia. You need to understand the human geography of the area because that's really what has shaped it and formed it into what we know what it is today. You know, oil is such an important part, but it's really the kind of religious and political uh, landscape that has shaped Southwest Asia into what it is today. So, as we continue to talk about this area, especially around Jerusalem, I want you to really get an understanding of historically why it has kind of shaped that way. And a lot of it had to do with the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire had been controlling a huge area, like a really large area. For about 400 years, it was under Muslim control. And we're not just talking about this area like Israel and Jerusalem in this area. We're talking a huge span of an empire stretching all the way into really the Balkan Peninsula, way over into areas such as almost to India, to Pakistan, to Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and those areas. So the Ottoman Empire was really big, huge territory, and it had been controlled by Muslims for about 400 years in this area until about World War One. Now, if you remember from world history, or what you will learn in world history, is that by the time we get to World War One, we refer to the Ottoman Empire as the sick man of Europe. They were really losing their power and control, especially in the Balkan Peninsula area. And after World War One, the Ottomans lost control of this area here on this map. And it was divided between France and Britain. Now, this is going to be a big part of the issue. A big part of the problem is that a country, a couple of nations who really are very culturally, traditionally, and religiously different start kind of calling the shots in an area that they probably shouldn't have. However, that's kind of the way it happened. So the land controlled by Britain became known as Palestine. So this area, you see that picture right there, that is Israel, and then you see Jordan. This whole area became known as Palestine. So if you've heard of Palestine today or the Palestinians, this is a term that happened after World War One, when Europeans, especially the British, start controlling this area. And you can see that map right there. This is the UN partition plan in 1947. And so it's the British who are kind of calling the shots in this area. So the British created a homeland for Jews and supported a movement called Zionism. Here's the issue. Now, mostly we're talking about this area in Israel. So after World War II, and you probably know a little bit about what had happened after the Holocaust, and Adolf Hitler literally systematically, murdered 6 million people simply because of their religion, simply because of who they were. And those who had survived the Holocaust, they had nothing. Like, most of their family members were killed. If they survived, they didn't really have a home, they didn't have families, they really had very little to call their own in Europe. And so the British decided to kind of encourage this movement back to Israel. Now remember, this is where God promised the Jews, right? God said, "You are my holy people, you are my chosen people, I'm giving you this land." Well, this land that we call Palestine, was originally the Jews. However, for many different reasons, Jews, they left, they dispersed, they went to other areas of the world. After World War II, those who had survived, they had a place to call their own again, because the British people, the British government said, "You deserve this. You just went through the Holocaust." And you can see why, they did deserve it. Except you should start thinking to yourself, yeah, but other people were already living there. For the previous 400 years, it had been under Muslim control. There were a lot of people living there who now all of a sudden there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people streaming into Israel, and there's a government saying they get to be there. And others are going, well, wait, we live here. This is our home. You can't just kick me out of my home. And so you can understand really where the friction is going to start. However, you can probably see both sides of it, right? Like the Israelites, the Jewish people, this was their home and this is where they needed to be because they had just suffered the worst atrocity the world has ever seen. Yet at the same time, there are people who have already been living there, have been living there for centuries. And now all of a sudden, other groups are saying, you're out of luck. You need to move. So Arab nations invaded to prevent the division of Palestine. And unfortunately, they're still fighting today. There's a lot of fighting amongst Arabs. Sometimes we refer to Arabs mostly as Muslims and Jews because of this problem, because of this issue that happened after World War II and Adolf Hitler. So for some reason, I have an E right there. We'll talk about what was going on. So Palestinian Arabs were forced into refugee camps in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and this is under Israel's control. So stick with me here. I know this is a lot to take in. After World War II, Britain is controlling this area. And they basically say, hey, we want to give control over to the Israelites, to you Jewish people. You deserve this area. You see that bigger map, or the inset map, I should say, of Israel. We want to give you this area. And when the Israelis started living there and controlling the area, which they were entitled to, I guess according to the British Authority, they were entitled to, they basically said to the Palestinians, those Muslims, those Arabs living in this area, who have once again been there for centuries and centuries, you need to move. You need to move to these separate areas that we have basically designated for you. It's a little bit like if you know what happened with Native American reservations in the United States government. The United States government said, hey, Native Americans, we want your land. We're going to take your land, but we're going to move you to these reservations. We're going to give you this land somewhere else, but you got to move because we need this land and we're going to take it. You can have this area over here, but we're going to move you. Well, it's a little bit like saying, hey, we want to take North Dakota. Like if South Dakota came in and been like, hey, we want to take North Dakota. You can keep living around here in the United States, but you have to move to Montana. Like you can still be a United States citizen. You just have to move. Well, it would be a little bit like if I were in North Dakota, I'd be like, I don't want to leave. This is my home. This is where my friends and family and my job and my work and this is where I know. Please don't make me move. And so you can understand why the West Bank and the Gaza Strip still even today are very, very hotly contested. So because of that, because they were kind of forced into these very small areas, if you look at that map, I'll move this a little bit. If you look at this map, this is 10 miles right here. So the Gaza Strip, we're talking about maybe about 20 miles, maybe a little bit more than 20 miles. The West Bank is a little bit more than that. That's a really small area. And so the Palestinian Liberation Army, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was formed to kind of regain that land. They were going to fight. They're going to fight for their territory. They're going to fight for the right to live where they wanted to live. Leaders such as Yasser Arafat and groups such as the Hamas have been part of the push to gain back Palestinian land since essentially 1947. That's a picture right there of Yasser Arafat. He was the head of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He has since died. But Yasser Arafat, as much as he tried to do good and make peace, There really hasn't ever been any lasting peace. Ironically, he has Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat were both, one's a Palestinian, one's an Israeli. They were both given like the joint Nobel Peace Prize. But unfortunately, it has really not brought about any lasting peace, and there's still a lot of issues yet today. So this is why I really want to talk. It seems like this is a lot of history, but this part of the area is so much shaped by the history of what has gone on in it, in the birthplace of both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So there are many refugees and a constant unrest, and all of this has contributed to great unemployment, needs for shelter, basic necessities, and there's a lot of people who live in constant fear, in just a struggle, like an everyday struggle, year after year, generation after generation. The infrastructure has been damaged over years of fighting. Religious organizations such as the Druze and the Maronites, those are Roman Catholics who follow the Eastern Orthodox religion, live among this disorder between Jews and Muslims. I included this YouTube video. It's a pretty biased look. It's, I'm going to say it doesn't make Jewish people sound very good, but it might give you a sense, and I hope you watch it. It's only a couple minutes long. It might give you a sense of just what life is like, especially in Israel around the West Bank, where Jerusalem is. 3 major religions are vying for territory and are vying for land and political rights. Okay, so this is the last couple of slides here. They're ethnic areas of the northeast part of Southwest Asia, and it goes way, way back to really the beginning of civilization called Mesopotamia. This is the Fertile Crescent, and if you look at that map, you can even see it's like a little crescent shape, a little half moon shape almost. It's called the land between the rivers, and the Tigris and the Euphrates, and you can see where those two kind of come together to dump into the Persian Gulf, is known as the birthplace of civilization. In fact, they've found the oldest remains of any permanent settlement in the Fertile Crescent. So it makes a lot of sense as to why they'd find it here. It's the Fertile Crescent. It's fertile land. People could grow things to live, and because of the water area, they were able to do so. Many ethnicities have flourished here. Today, Turks, Kurds, Persians live in what we call Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. Most of the people who live there today are Muslim, but they're culturally different than other Muslims. Many of them speak Farsi, and Farsi is kind of like it's not a dialect, but it's kind of like a type of Arabic language. If you are literate or you are able to speak Farsi, you have a really good skill, because you could do a lot of negotiation or talk with diplomats and states, because if you speak English and you can also speak Farsi, that would be pretty impressive. So there's some clashes among these groups, again, because they are just culturally different. One of the big clashes are the Taliban. Now, if you've heard of the Taliban before, I want you to understand that the Taliban is a political group. In fact, we kind of think of the Taliban almost like, not exactly a political party, but you understand the difference between like Republicans and Democrats, right? The Taliban isn't quite like a Republican or a Democrat party, but they are like a political group. However, Taliban has historically supported a very radical group called Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda is a terrorist group that was protected and funded by, oftentimes, the Taliban. And remember, this Taliban is a legitimate political entity. However, Al-Qaeda is definitely not a political entity. They are a terrorist group. And they were basically set out, their mission is to attack Westerners. Any Westerners who are non-Muslim, non-Arabic nations, they were like, that was their mission, to attack. So Christians, Americans, many have been targeted by Al-Qaeda groups. Saddam Hussein is that man up there in the top left, in the black and white. Saddam Hussein he has been put to death, but he was from Iraq. He was one of the reasons why Iraq went into Kuwait to take over their oil fields, and why the United States got involved in the first Persian Gulf. He was a tyrant. He was a really horrible dictator. Horrible dictator. He gassed thousands of Kurds and Shiite Muslims simply because they were Kurds, and he especially hated Kurds. Kurds were those people who lived in the southeast part of Turkey. Osama bin Laden. So Saddam Hussein was stopped. Eventually he was killed by his own people. But out of that came another leader, and his name is Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden also has been stopped, but not without a lot of damage done. He was the head of the Al-Qaeda group, and he was responsible for 9/11 and the mass murder of millions, maybe thousands for sure, of people. His true mission was to kill infidels, to take out any Americans, any Christians, anybody he just had a true deep-seated hatred for. All right, so it's really important to understand the human geography part of Southwest Asia. So until we meet again, you will be taking your test on this on Thursday. So in the meantime, take care.